Hello fellow stewards, today we're diving into the ideas tree in Frostpunk 2. By the end of this video, you'll understand what ideas are available, what radical ideas are, and how to prioritize ideas in the early, mid, and late game. Let's get started. After you finish the prologue in chapter 1 or when you're starting a new Utopia game, you won't immediately have access to the ideas tree. First, you need to build a housing district. Then you need to expand the housing district. That will allow you to build a building on top of this empty building slot, and you're going to build the Research Institute. When completed, you should be able to research new ideas now. You'll notice in the bottom right of your corner, there is this icon for the ideas tree. Alternatively, you can hit R hotkey. The ideas tree is divided into 6 sections. Heating focuses on your generator and heat management. Resources unlocks buildings to boost production and manage resources. Frostland deals with expeditions and logistics. City addresses housing and city issues. Society covers children, crime, and disease. And the hub unlocks all the hubs. As you progress, research starts with the basic ideas and expand outwards into more advanced and powerful ones. Some research are locked behind game events. For example, you need oil before you can get generator upgrade 1, and all research requires heat stamps. You'll also notice these diamonds, and if you hover over them, these icons. Some ideas are tied to specific ideologies, others could be neutral. Each idea can vary depending on the faction that's suggesting it. For example, the Frostlanders here are suggesting dust coal mines, whereas the New Londoners and the Stalwarts are suggesting blasting coal mines. Variations in the buildings typically tweak resource demands, whereas different ideas for laws may be more significant. Here we have the Stalwarts suggesting something that affects workforce, whereas the Frostlanders are suggesting something to reduce heat demand. Whenever you research ideas, be sure to check if they've unlocked buildings, laws, or whether they're just a passive buff. You can tell by the little tiny icon above the idea itself. The boxy one over here is a building, the circular one over here is a law, and there's a couple of passive ones indicated by this arrow. If you're researching a law, make sure you pass that law for the effects to take place. For example, if you're researching workers' shifts, you can research the idea. It will take some time to research. As the research completes, it will kick off a vote for the law. When you go into the law, you need to pass this vote to get all its effects. When you're researching a passive like housing insulation, all you have to do is complete the research. When the research is completed, you can see the housing district immediately has that +20 from housing insulation, no extra steps required. And finally, when you're researching a building, you need to wait for the research to complete. When the research is completed, you will be able to access a new building in the corresponding district section. And finally, at the bottom of the research panel, you will see how long it takes to do each research and how much it costs in heat stamps. Next, let's talk about radical ideas. They basically function like regular ideas, except they are generally much more powerful. Radical ideas are always tied to these 3 cornerstones, and they're gated behind your ideological progress behind each cornerstone. If you see one of your radical ideas grayed out, you can hover over it and your game will tell you which ideology you need more progress towards to research that radical idea. For example, I can research procreation because I have enough in tradition, but I can't research incubation because I haven't progressed enough into reason. Also, bear in mind when you implement a radical idea, it will drastically shift you towards that ideology. Next, let's talk about research speed. I can't see a UI element that summarizes all your research speed neatly, but basically they can be increased by laws like this. Research speed is marginally increased. They can be increased by research institutes, and the more you build, the faster your research becomes. And finally, you also have the technocrats, which can optimize your research and extremely increase it. Let's take a look at a law that takes forever to research and see how all these buffs affect it. Here we have Asylum, which takes 24 weeks to research with just a single research center. If we activate a second research center and go back to that same law, we can see the research time has now dropped to 18 weeks. If I activate more research centers, you can see that effect continues on, and now with 4 active, it's gone to 13 weeks. You can continue to activate more and more research centers, but there will be a diminishing return. Here I have 9 research centers activated, and you can see it's now dropped to around 10 weeks. Of course, this will be all affected by all your other buffs for research as well. I'm a data engineer, so I've graphed all of this out for you so we can visually see what is the optimal number of research centers to have. Well, using our asylum as a baseline, you can see with one research center we get 24 weeks, and as you get more and more and more, it starts to peter off and give you diminishing returns. I would suggest the sweet spot is around 4 research centers, which will halve the research time. Then after that, it kind of is not really worth it to build more. Another way to increase your research speed, if you go to a district with an active research center, you'll have this Rush Researchers option. You can click this and research speed will be extremely increased. When I click it, you can see my asylum, which used to be 24 weeks, has now dropped down to 14 weeks, which almost doubles the research speed, but not quite. It's interesting to note that each district has their own separate rush research. So while this district is rushing research, you can also, if you have another district with more research centers, rush the researchers here too. And you can see with all of that up, we got the thing down to 8 weeks. Next, let's talk about the technocrats. They are a specific faction. If you want them to spawn, they're aligned to progress, equality, and reason. So you just got to go into those cornerstones and they'll eventually spawn. When you are gold bar with them, you can use this ability, which is called optimized research, and it says research speed is extremely increased. If you click it, you go into your research tree and we'll check asylum again. It's gone from 24 weeks down to 14 weeks. So it works the same buff as the rush research thing. And I believe all of these buffs, they all stack multiplicatively. So if I leave that research from the technocrat buff on, we can go over here and we can rush the research. If we rush the research and we go check again, you can see both buffs have stacked together and dropped it down to 10 weeks. Just for fun, why don't we turn on all of our districts and rush research in every single one of them? You will burn through all your trust doing this, so don't do this. It's just silly. But with all my research rushed and the technocrats buff and 9 research centers, we can see that asylum research has gone down to just 3 weeks from 24 weeks. Now let's go over each of the tabs and all of the research available within each tab so you guys get a good understanding of the research tree and where everything actually is. Let's start with the heating tab. Heating is tied to adaptation and progress. Going north, you're going to find your 3 generator upgrades, generator upgrade 1, 2, and 3. And depending on whether you've aligned yourself with adaptation or progress, it'll give you the corresponding generator upgrade for oil pumps or for adaptive pumps. And then it kind of follows along for the 3 generator upgrades. To the left of that is settlement heating. You will need this upgrade to go turn temporary outposts in the Frostlands into permanent settlements for infinite resources. To the right of that, you have the progress equivalent, which is the deep melting drill, allowing you to access the infinite resource deposits around your map. If you ever see some of those infinite ones, I've already accessed all of them, so I can't show you. But yeah, these deep fertile soils and stuff, that's what that deep melting drill allows you to access. In the story, you will only have access to one or the other, depending on whether you embrace the frost, you'll get settlement heating. And then if you chose to defeat the frost, then you'll get these melting deep deposits. Of course, in Utopia, if you aligned yourself a little bit to progress and a little bit to adaptation, you can get access to both at the same time. The next building over here is the coal liquefactor. It will be able to output oil at the cost of coal. Next, we have this building called the heat dispatcher. It lets you trade workforce for heat. It can be built in any district. So if you happen to have a lot of workforce and need some heat, this is a good option, I guess. But I mean, for 600 workforce instead, you could just build a new oil extraction district, which will get you 60 oil and 120 heat without taking up valuable building slots. So I'm not really sure what the point of this is. Housing insulation and food energy efficiency both reduce heat demands in the housing and food districts respectively. They reduce housing heat demand by around 20 and food district heat demand by 40. Down to the south, you have all your extraction buildings for fuel. Coal mines get you coal, geothermal plants get you steam, and pump jacks get you oil. And then you have the advanced version of those three buildings. And all the way down south, there is this radical building called the pyrochemical oil extractor that outputs a whopping 750 oil. Next, let's take a look at the resources tab. It's also tied to the progress adaptation cornerstone. Traveling north, we have a few laws that deal with workers. We got the worker shifts that can either reduce the heat demand in your industry and extraction districts, or it can reduce the workforce requirement. Next, we have waste heat conversion laws, which will reduce the heat demand in housing districts, or you can get production efficiency increase. If we go further north, we have our first radical idea in the resource section for new work model, and in here you can get Apex Workers. Apex Workers will give you plus 20 heat and 30% increase of base output of the district, but it's not affected by buildings. Or you can get Machine Attendants, which will decrease workforce requirements by 25%, but this is affected by buildings. Below that, you have the Automated Workforce. It's a building that goes in your industrial district and it will output 1600 workforce basically. Going clockwise, we have our basic and advanced hothouse variations that will be placed in your food districts to output food. Next, we have the filtration tower, as well as the waste management facility. Both of these deal with squalor. One goes in your housing district, this filtration tower, and one goes in your industry district, the waste management or repurposing facility. Down south, we have 4 factories that sit in your industry district. You've got your basic factory that outputs some prefabs and some goods. You've got your specialized factory. This one gives materials, this one gives prefabs, and this one gives goods. Over to the left, we have our sawmill and advanced sawmill. They go in extraction districts that you place over forests and they will extract materials. Alternatively, you have the foundries and the advanced foundries, and they can be placed over iron veins and they will also extract materials. And finally, you have this charcoal plant, which you basically put materials in and it comes out with coal. Next, let's talk about the Frostland tab. It is also tied into adaptation versus progress. First, we have our logistic bays up north. They will increase your Frostland team output. And to the left, you have the Scouts Headquarter and Scouts Training Ideas, which both deal with territory threat level. So when you're in the Frostlands, if you see all your territories are like dangerous or something, you might want to research some of that to reduce the threat level. Take note, this one is a building that goes in your logistics district, whereas Scout Training is a law that you need to pass. To the right of that, we have the Harvester Hangars, a building that goes in your logistics district, and it'll increase harvesting efficiency, basically more output of food from your outposts that give you food in the Frostlands. Below that, we have a very important research, the Skyways. They basically unlock Skyway connections, which basically you can build in the Frostlands instead of trails, and they will have a lot more bandwidth for resources. See, this gives 250. A Skyway gives 600 of any resource. That's very important. When you are transferring resources between cities, you have a limited bandwidth to transport resources based on the connection, whether it's a trail or a Skyway. If you need to boost that bandwidth any further, you can build a freight dock in your logistics zones, and that will increase the bandwidth even further and also increase the resource production in outposts connected by Skyways. Once you've researched that idea and you go even further south, you'll get a new law called Outpost Operations. One option decreases outpost upkeep, while the other option increases production efficiency in the outposts. Next, let's move on to the City tab, which is tied to Equality versus Merit cornerstone. Going north first, we have laws that deal with labor. The first two are workers' compensation and labor organization. They both either do trust or production efficiency. Trust or production efficiency. Researching these two will lead to these two radical laws. Workplace control. This can either decrease tension or it can boost production efficiency. This production efficiency is quite powerful. It's a 30% boost to all districts and their buildings. Poverty eradication is a radical merit building that produces 100 goods and decreases crime and gives you the district ability hard labor for another 40 goods. Next, we have alcohol, which either give you heat stamps per capita or it gives you trust. It leads to drugs manufactory. They both increase disease, but the opioids variation increases trust, whereas the stimulants variation boosts production efficiency and also reduces your heat stamp income. Next, we have the maintenance duty law, which can decrease the material cost of your districts. Alternatively, it can also do less material demand decrease, but give you a slight bump in production efficiency as well. To the south, you have all your stuff that deals with housing. You have a building, the housing block, which goes in your housing districts and provides shelter. There's various variations of that. Then you have your housing distribution laws, which will either improve the amount of shelter provided by the housing for tension, or you can improve the housing a little bit and also get heat stamps. Then you have the workers' housing, which is basically a shelter building that goes in food extraction and industrial zones. Next, we have a radical building for famine prevention. This building, it says it decreases hunger. Don't be confused. This doesn't decrease food demand. It decreases hunger if your citizens are already starving. It also gives you this food sweep district ability, which will give you 5,000 food in a pinch. And finally, we have the radical leisure buildings. In your housing districts, you can build these pleasure commons that decrease tension, increases trust for heat stamps, or you can build the pleasure club, which increases your heat stamps, but reduces the trust. Next, let's talk about the society tab. This one is all tied to the tradition versus reason cornerstone. Traveling north, everything here deals with reducing crime. This watchtowers lets you build watchtowers in the housing districts, and they will reduce crime and increase guard squad output and gives you an ability to further reduce crime. The prisons idea obviously lets you build prisons, and it is necessary for enacting captain's authority, and it gives you the ability to mobilize prison wardens, which will give you more guard squads. Criminal reparations will let you increase your research speed, or it can decrease the outpost upkeep. Crime elimination is an interesting one. It can significantly decrease your crime at the cost of population growth, or you can do public executions, which will let you execute your prisoners. Next, we have guard immunity, which is just a simple tradition law that decreases crime. On the bottom right over here, we have the relationship section. Youth is a law that can raise trust at the cost of tension, and it also gives you this ability, which bolsters your city's workforce but decreases heat stamp income. Its counterpart is dutiful youth, which increases percentage of active workers and decreases crime. And it gives you the youth volunteer ability, which bolsters the city's workforce at the cost of trust. Next, in parenthood, you have a couple of laws. One of them will give you percentage of active workers, and the other will give you population growth. Following that, we have relationships, which is also a pair of laws. The first one gives population growth significant increase with some drawbacks, or you can just get normal population growth with no drawbacks. Those ideas lead to these two radical ideas. The first is procreation. The reason version is birthing program, which marginally increases population growth, but disease is significantly decreased, whereas the tradition version is mandatory procreation, which significantly boosts population growth at the cost of heat stamps. Finally, we have a building that is aligned to reason called the incubation house. You can build this in your housing districts, and it will boost your population growth passively, but it also gives you this active ability where you can pay heat stamps to increase the natural growth of your population. To the bottom left, we have all the stuff that deals with disease. So we've got hospitals. All the different flavors will decrease disease. This particular one, teaching hospital, will increase research speed. In the treatments, we've got a couple of laws again. They both decrease disease, but this one increases research speed, and it lets you get an ability to conduct medical trials, which is used in districts with a hospital, and it will reduce disease, but it will kill people. Next, we have the pharmaceuticals building. Its purpose is to reduce disease, but there is a flavor of it which can also increase research speed. And it also gives you an ability to boost research speed even further, just like the rush research ability. That will of course lead to the radical idea for Panseum Factory, which is a building that goes in your industrial districts that produces food, and it will also decrease the disease as well. Finally, in this tree, we have another radical idea called the asylum. This one is a building that goes in your housing districts, and it will basically just increase trust. Finally, we have the hubs tab, and the hubs tab isn't aligned to anything, and basically they just allow you to build hubs that use the adjacency bonus to give you certain boosts. I won't go through this in too much detail because I have 2 hub videos that you can check out that talk about how to utilize these hubs to create awesome builds. To go through it really quickly, going clockwise, we've got the communications hub, which deals with trust. The surveillance hub reduces crime. The emergency medical hub deals with disease. The air transport hub will decrease workforce requirements. The maintenance hub reduces materials demand. The fighting hub reduces tension. And finally, we have the rail hub, which increases efficiency bonus. That was obviously a lot of information to digest, and being a data analyst, of course, I had to condense all of that into one neat little infographic. Here I present to you the research cheat sheet. You have all your research categorized into different sections depending on what they boost. For example, this section boosts heat, this one boosts shelter, production, research, etc. Everything that you could possibly need. It is of course all color-coded into the different research tabs. You will see icons on the left to indicate whether they are buildings or whether they are laws. And any radical research is marked with this big red R. So to use the cheat sheet, for example, you might go, I want more workforce. Then you can look in here and go under worker shifts, there is machine-centric shifts. And that is orange, and orange means it's in the resources tab. Unfortunately for the video, I couldn't fit all this onto one 1920 by 1080 page. So I had to make a second page, which deals with all of your problems in the city, like hunger, disease, squalor, crime, tension, and increasing trust, frostlands, and guard squads. But I will have a Google link description to an image that has all of this cheat sheet onto a single page. Unfortunately, I am not a graphics designer, I am a data engineer, so I'm not good at this sort of stuff. And lastly, if you find any errors with any of these organization, or if anything's color-coded incorrectly or giving the wrong buff, just let me know in the comments and I will continuously keep the Google Drive image updated. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about the video, so just refer to the Google Drive link in the description. Now that you have a firm understanding of all the ideas that exist in the game and what you can research, we can get into a couple of examples for early, mid, and late game that I recommend. By all means, this is not the authority on how you should play the game. Do that however you like. This is just some guidance on what I like to do. I recommend you should always do research based on your current needs, and if you can anticipate your near-distant future needs, that's even better. I also recommend that you research stuff based on promises. So for example, when you're voting for your laws, and if they happen to have a research that you really want, right now, in my vote of confidence right at the start of the game, they're asking me to research the blasting coal mine. That is absolutely perfect because I wanted to research that anyway, and I can do that now and gain trust and favor with that faction. When you're in the early game, I recommend you grab the resource extraction buildings to meet all your demands for heat, shelter, food, materials, and goods. For example, if you go into here, I would generally start with coal mines first to get my heat sorted. Then I would move on to resources. I like to get factory next because that gives me prefab and it saves me from creating a prefab extraction district. That 10 prefabs a week is actually awesome. Next, I would work on hothouses and I would work on sawmills to get materials and your food sorted out. You do have a stockpile of materials and food at the start of the game, so you don't have to worry about that too much. Once you've got all your materials sorted out, you can probably go into city and get one of your housing blocks to get your shelter sorted out. Then I recommend heading over to your Frostlands tab and getting skyways set up as soon as possible. Once you've got your skyways, you can start looking at building your logistic bays and lowering the danger levels of the Frostlands using survivalist headquarters. By the mid game, hopefully you've got all of your materials stabilized. Once you do, you need to be a little bit more fluid with your research. I like to get promises done when my materials are stabilized to try to hit devoted with all of my factions. So you go over here and you make them a promise and see what they want you to research. If you need power, it's probably a good idea to start hitting generator upgrade 1 and generator upgrade 2. In your city tab, it's probably a good idea to start getting alcohol. City run alcohol shops is super powerful because it gives you a bunch of heat stamps. It's a percentage based buff, so you can see my one's giving me like 22% out of my base like 98, so it's probably around the 20% mark or something like that. You can see my one over here gives me 22.7, and I believe it scales off your individual contribution. So it gives you like 50%, whatever the individual contribution is. So it's super overpowered at the moment. If you need more workers, you can go into society and start getting stuff like communal parenthood, which greatly increases the percentage of your active workers. And I would definitely recommend something like maintenance duty to significantly decrease your material demand. Between mid-game and late game, you should start getting your Steam cores, so I recommend having all your advanced version of your extraction buildings unlocked, like advanced sawmills, advanced hot houses in your heating tab. Make sure you get your advanced pump jacks and your advanced coal mines, whatever you happen to be using. Then you can look at your cornerstones, and depending on what you're progressing through, you can look at what radical laws are available to you. A couple of ones that I recommend is new work model. Apex Workers is ridiculously overpowered. In the city tab, I also recommend this one over here under workplace control for empowered management for production efficiency. This is also super overpowered, and it scales off your buildings too. If we hover over here in our food output district, you can see empowered management is giving me 54 compared to the base output of 180, which is 30%. And if you turn off these buildings, you can see it gives a lot less, which is just 18 out of 60, which is still 30%. But it does scale off the buildings in your district, which is super powerful. And another one that I would recommend in the society tab if you need more population is this mandatory procreation. It'll significantly boost your population growth, and sure, you lose a bit of heat stamps, but you're in the late game and you probably don't need any more heat stamps. And just one final note before we close out. When you max out your cornerstones and you want access to the cornerstone abilities, they are found in your research tree. For example, I've maxed out these 3 cornerstones. You have to go to your research tree, go to the corresponding tabs, and you can enact your cornerstone ability from this big button right in the center over here. Make sure you go to the right tab. So if you're doing this cornerstone for adaptation, it's in these 3 tabs. If you're doing the cornerstone for equality, for example, it's in the city tab. And if you're doing the cornerstone for tradition, for example, it is in the society tab. Now, I'm not going to go through what all of these cornerstones do because I don't really think they're research related. And I do have a video in my factions and cornerstones guide that talks much more in detail about these cornerstone abilities. And that's it, folks. That's everything you should need to know about research to help you finish the game. Now, if I've missed anything, just check the comments section. I'm sure somebody will have asked me questions. I do reply to all my comments, so maybe your answer's in there. Additionally, there are many astute viewers that I have that will surely provide many other useful tips that I haven't covered in the video. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video and you've learnt something, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.